So I'm not going to beat around the bush in this video. You saw the title, the Byzantine Empire never existed. But what actually is the Byzantine Empire? The Byzantine Empire is a term coined by 16th century historians used to refer to what was left of the Roman Empire after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But the justification for the continuous usage of this term is actually deeply flawed and not even well applied in context. And that's what this entire video is about, right? I'm going to explain why the Byzantine Empire was not separate from the Roman Empire, and even the term Byzantine Empire is inaccurate. Alright, time for some history. You see, ever since the end of the 3rd century crisis, the Emperor Diocletian split the Roman Empire along administrative lines. For the next several decades, several emperors would do the same, and the more they did this, the more East and Western Roman Empire began to slowly diverge. But it was still Rome, with one emperor, sometimes two, sometimes three, and sometimes four. Similar to how the southern US was very economically and socially different from the north, but still part of the United States, back in the 19th century. The Roman Empire basically followed this painfully predictable formula. Rome would have an emperor. That emperor would want to split the empire to prevent political instability or just grant favors to his sons or allies. Both sides of the Roman Empire would begin to squabble, civil war, winner unifies the empire, and repeat. So eventually, this guy, Theodosius, also known as Theodosius the Great, became Roman Emperor, and before his death, he split the Roman Empire between his two sons. The Roman Empire would never again have the chance to be united before the western half was destroyed. These two sons were Honorius and Arcadius, and the Byzantine Empire refers to what became of Arcadius' portion of the Roman Empire. So why was this term Byzantine Empire coined in the first place, and what was the justification for its usage? You see, by the 16th century, some Western historians began to feel that the Eastern Roman Empire was far too detached from the initial perception of the Roman Empire that they had. They, and a lot of people today, argue that the Eastern Roman Empire became more Greek as they spoke the Greek language and adopted more Greek culture, and also adopting Orthodox Christianity rather than Roman Catholicism. Also, since Rome was initially split into two by the Emperor Theodosius, and since the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire became the old city of Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire would be a much better description of the Roman Empire. And honestly, I kind of agree with this in some ways if it was only a description. I don't agree when people try to use the reasons stated above, or maybe a couple of extra reasons, to explain why the Byzantine Empire was a completely different country from the Roman Empire. It wasn't. The first problem with calling the Eastern Roman Empire Byzantine Empire is that the name assumes that the Roman Empire was called the Roman Empire because its capital was in Rome. No, it was called the Roman Empire because it was administered by Roman citizens. The reason I say this is because the Roman Empire had multiple capitals throughout its life. The first time Rome ceased to be the capital of the Roman Empire was in 324, when the Emperor Constantine the Great moved the capital from Rome to Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople. And sometimes, whenever the Roman government changed, the capital was moved to a different place. At the time the Western Roman Empire fell, Rome wasn't even the capital. It was Ravenna. And in fact, Rome hadn't been the capital of the Roman Empire for almost 200 years. And it remained the Roman Empire throughout this period. Also, whenever the Roman Empire was split, each side would get a capital where the government was run. There are many examples of this in other cases. For instance, after Napoleon invaded and took over the Portuguese mainland, the capital city of the Portuguese Empire was transferred to Brazil from where the empire was run. This did not mean that the Portuguese Empire stopped being the Portuguese Empire just because the capital was no longer stationed at Portugal, or just because Portugal had fallen to Napoleon. So now that we have proven that the Roman Empire wasn't called that because of its capital, but because of its people and its government, were the people of the Eastern Roman Empire Romans? Yes, they were. The people of the Roman Empire, both East and West, identified as Romans throughout the existence of the empire. Even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the people of the Eastern Roman Empire still identified as Romans and were still called Romans until the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire in 1453. Even after 1453, the former Eastern Romans, especially the Greeks, still referred to themselves as Romans. Like, how ironic is that? Other than the people, the government still remained the same. The emperors of Eastern Rome were referred to as emperors of Rome throughout its existence. Even the original names continued from the original Roman Empire. That's why this guy is Tiberius II and not Tiberius I, right? He's a successor to the original Tiberius, who was a Roman emperor. Another reason people say the Byzantine Empire was different from the Roman Empire is because the Roman Empire was split into East and West, so there were basically two countries. But this is actually wrong because the Roman Empire was never actually split into two countries. It was only divided along administrative lines, meaning the country was the same, the government was just divided, with one side running the east and the other side running the west, but they were still in union. It was basically a diarchy, and the people living inside this diarchy saw themselves as Romans, part of the Roman Empire, one empire. Another point that some people make is that the Eastern Roman Empire didn't control the city of Rome, so they can't be called the Roman Empire. However, the Emperor Justinian reconquered Rome in the 6th century. The Eastern Roman Empire actually held lands in Italy among Latin speakers for centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, meaning that for that period of time, the Eastern Roman Empire did have Latin speakers and was part of the Italian world like the Western Roman Empire, along with the times that they did actually control Rome itself. The final and probably the most solid argument is the cultural and language difference of the Western Roman Empire at the end of its life compared to the Eastern Roman Empire at the end of its life. But this is still not accurate because it treats the Roman Empire as a culturally, linguistically, and ethnically homogeneous state, which in fact it wasn't. The eastern part of the Roman Empire was always more Greek in culture and language even before the foundation of the Roman Empire, and it remained so after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Roman Empire had multiple cultures, religions, and ethnicities. A perfect example of this would be Britain, which was part of the Western Roman Empire, but despite being part of the Western Roman Empire, they were very different. Latin was not as prevalent of a language. Despite the Roman Empire officially being Christian, paganism was widespread. In fact, some areas had absolutely no Christian contact, and the people were very culturally different from the rest of Rome. Hey there, my friend. I'm a merchant from the East, and I have been traveling for a long time. So I just wanted to find out if this place that I was right now was the Roman province of Britannia. Yup, sure is. Whoa. That's great. So, through my travels, I found that trade was better if we actually spoke to each other in our native languages. Do you speak Latin? No. You don't speak Latin? What is the Roman Empire? Yeah, most people around me don't speak Latin, so I never really saw any reason to. Alright, sure. I mean, since we can both already understand each other, this should not be a problem. So, wanna buy this silver cross of roughly the same size and weight as a gold coin for a gold coin? Why would I need a silver cross? For Jesus and stuff. Like, I'm sorry, what god do you worship? I don't know. Frankly, changes every day at this point. Wow. Are you sure this is the Roman province of Britannia? That's why it's not a good argument to say that the Eastern Roman Empire was different from the Western Roman Empire because of how different they were culturally and linguistically to the Western Roman Empire. Also, the Eastern Roman Empire fell almost 1,000 years after the fall of the West. Like, a lot can change about a country in 1,000 years. Just look at France, for instance. Like France 1,000 years ago. They were completely different from what they are today. Different culture, different language, different government, very much different, yet they're still friends. Show it's reduced or maybe expanded in some areas. So that's it. The Byzantine Empire never existed. It was just the Eastern Roman Empire, which was just the Roman Empire. So that's it for this video, guys. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you disagree with me, you can make your arguments in the comments and I will try to respond if I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.